His phone just kept ringing. My heart sank because he always picks up on the second ring.
Sources close to the investigation say a missed patch cycle under NIST guidance may have triggered the incident.
He didn't come in for his Reuben sandwich.
He was diligent, ran weekly scans, stayed on top of his CIS benchmarks. But the pressure? Compliance isn't just policies and frameworks. It's the people behind them.
In all my years, I've never seen a sysadmin go missing after flagging a NIST 853 control deficiency.
I didn't see him emerge from the SOC for his smoke break. That's when I knew something was wrong.
It was from 2015. I never thought that unpatched CVE would matter. I swear, I'll follow the control next time.
Wow, what a movie. What a trailer. I can't wait to see the real movie. Anyways, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Sagi Kretu. And first and foremost, I'd like to introduce our guests. First of all, we have Brian, the CEO of ITECH Solutions. Hi, Brian. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent. And we have Ryan Patton from Vicarious. So why
Hey, everybody.
Hi, everyone. And of course, myself, Sagi, I'm the senior PMM at Vicarious. And why don't we start with Brian? Kind of tell us a bit about yourself, your challenges, how you work with compliance, and so on.
Yeah, we're an MSP or IT service provider out of California. This is our 20th year in business, and we service small businesses all the way up to mid-market. Largest clients about 7,000 users, kind of in a co-managed relationship. And we're heavily focused on security, of course, cybersecurity as an IT provider, but more importantly, we're realizing compliance is just as important as security, right? As we strengthen security through a zero trust approach, security, I feel like sometimes just gets us to focus on the technology part, and proper coverage or compliance really has people, process, and technology. So I'm happy to be here to talk about compliance and excited about the discussion we're going to have.
Well, welcome, Brian, and we appreciate your coming. Thank you. Brian, tell us your experience. What do you see customers doing with compliance?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic these days. And for anyone that doesn't know me, by the way, I'm Ryan. I'm solution architect, team lead for Vicarious North America. Really excited to be here talking about compliance today. But yeah, I think it's something that a lot of we were just talking before. A lot of the senior stakeholders in different organizations, be it a CISO or something like that, are really going to look to kind of map some of their controls and processes to. And yeah, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into that today. So looking forward to it.
Amazing, amazing. So yes, as you heard, our topic for today is compliance, what it means for us, what it means for us as a vendor, and of course, what it means for MSPs like ITECH and their challenges with it, and so on, and what does it mean for their customers. So to start it off, Brian, is compliance helping us become more secure or just more auditable? I mean, where do you draw the line between meaningful controls and checkbox exercises?
Yeah, I know compliance can be seen as a checkbox. I hear the common phrase that compliance does not equal security, which I completely agree with. But I look at compliance as more like preventative care. If you think of security and whether or not you're secure, those are kind of point in time perspectives, and compliance really helps align you to an established framework that gives you more than just point in time protection, and really incorporates more than just technology, but also processes. Continuous improvement is one I'm a big fan of, as well as the people, aligning the people as well. There's got to be a culture buy-in for security, because people are the weakest link typically in a security event. There's only so much protection. You can only lead a horse to water, as they say. How do you get it to drink? It really needs to be part of the culture as well.
Amazing, amazing. And leading off from what you're saying about continuous, Ryan, for the life of me, why are we still treating compliance as an annual event or a biannual event in a real-time threat landscape? I mean, should continuous compliance be the new standard for every organization?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something we're seeing kind of shifting in a more positive direction. Obviously, there's some organizations who are quicker to adapt to some of those things than others. Some are just looking at how do I check the box and follow the letter of the law and not much more than that, because they're looking to pass an assessment or an attestation or something along those lines. And as Brian said a moment ago, it doesn't always equal security. I think about like a maintenance schedule on a car. They tell you have to do some things at a certain mileage. It doesn't mean you're not going to have any problems, but it means that you're going to have that warranty and kind of that fallback process to go through to give you some protection. You're following what the manufacturer states. And compliance is very much similar to that, but absolutely doing everything continuously as we see threats are coming out more rapidly, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But definitely to get it more to a security control rather than just checking the box. I think absolutely doing this continuously is going to have a huge advantage.
Amazing. And since everybody's talking about AI, I want to kind of plug AI into this discussion as well. Everybody knows that hackers are starting to leverage AI in writing exploits, and it takes minutes, right? So if we kind of make it adjacent into compliance, why is our compliance practice still taking months? Can automation keep up with the compliance pace that we need today? And that's for you, Brian.
One of the challenges I see with us internally that we face, and even internal IT of larger organizations, is when you look at a framework, we'll use NIST, for example. They have 5 pillars, and the first one is really identify. And so I wonder sometimes if we struggle to identify everything that we have to maintain compliance with just out of the gate. And do we not have an understanding of the full scope of what our threat landscape looks like in the first place? You've got human identities. You also have non-human identities, service principals, and that's really what AI is going to be using. It's not going to be using human identities. And then you have, if you think about all your assets that you have to identify in that pillar 1, you've got your identities, you've got devices, you've got applications, right? Whether they be desktop or cloud applications, what type of vulnerabilities might be there that you could have the best security in the world, but there's a back door, there's a hole. And as threat actors learn what those vulnerabilities are, if we don't patch them, or if they're not patchable, look at putting some sort of patchless protection in place, a detect and respond approach to potential suspicious behavior that might be happening around that vulnerability. It's really, not even in our purview to protect ourselves with. So, I just think, ultimately we have to identify everything we're responsible for keeping secure. Now, I will say that while I've named off a bunch of assets, there's the most important asset with the security framework, which is really your data. And that's what security frameworks are ultimately responsible for securing, is the data. Keep in mind, these human identities, these devices, these applications have access to said data. So that's why we care about keeping them shored up with security. But ultimately, we're doing all of this to protect the data, the intellectual property, the sensitive information that can't get out to the public, or that maybe a company doesn't want to get out to their competitors. That's the end goal ultimately.
That's interesting, because essentially kind of what you're saying is attacks will happen. They'll happen even more often. So we have to be able to kind of respond in a timely manner. We can't wait a month to patch something, right? We need to have some, like you said, some policies in place that react to those attacks if not real time, close to real time. Did I get the gist of this?
Yeah, there's best practices around vulnerability management in general, right? No matter what type of asset you're managing vulnerabilities with. And that's really where complying to a security framework helps with that. When we talk about CVEs, as we saw in the intro video, right? We keep an eye on those. Those are typically classified by risk. How damaging might they be if they're exploited? What type of access might that give to a threat actor? And these CVEs are public, so the threat actors know about them. And if we don't have a policy in place, it's part of our compliance framework that says, hey, when this type of CVE comes out at this certain level of risk, we're making sure it gets patched in time. You're just giving the threat actors more time to eventually exploit that vulnerability.
So what you're saying, compliance is not only working within a certain framework or adhering to a certain benchmark. You're saying it's a action-reaction type of response, if we can say that. So if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. So that's very interesting. Ryan, from your experience, because you've probably seen a lot of customers, what is the biggest blind spot that they're calling out in kind of most compliance programs, that they have? And what do you think the cost, or what they're telling you the cost is of ignoring those types of issues?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll start with the easier part of that question, which is the cost. I mean, that can be something as simple as a fine. If you're a CISO again who's responsible for implementing and maintaining some of these things, that's obviously you could be let go from that position if not even facing some sort of legal action. There's certainly been cases of that as well. In terms of the biggest thing that they're calling out, I think there's such a huge variety to that, and there's so many different frameworks that all have their different challenges within them. It could be tailored to a specific sector, maybe something for manufacturing, or it could be a regional thing, or it could be more of a general framework that they're looking to adhere to just to increase their security posture. But yeah, I would say, a lot of the same challenges that we see in other areas of, InfoSec apply to this, and, the skill gap, choosing the right tools, making sure processes are implemented, making sure it's part of the culture, as Brian called out earlier. I think that's a really huge one. We still see a lot of organizations where, the tail is wagging the dog, so to say, where, they're more concerned about, uptime and things like that than deploying security patches or deploying things that are going to reduce risk. Understandably so, I can see why they take that approach, but I think that's a really large challenge a lot of security practitioners have is making sure that those changes can be implemented in a timely manner.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. We're truly balancing security and convenience in this world, right?
Absolutely.
And the more we favor convenience, the less compliant we become.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, you're right. Businesses want to have uptime. Sometimes patching things, updating systems causes downtime. And so if there's not proper change control in place or change management, there might be a case where they've had a bad experience with that. And so the knee-jerk reaction is, well, we're not going to do that again because it caused too much downtime, versus, hey, let's just explore our processes around change management. How are we do we have patching rings, maintenance schedules? What does this look like to keep us up to date? When we talk about the risks that you pointed out, Ryan, about fines, I mean, there's other things too to consider.
Sure.
I wonder if we shouldn't bring up too, where, nowadays, cybersecurity insurance is more important, I should say, than like fire insurance, right? Everyone gets fire insurance, but it's more likely that a cybersecurity incident is going to happen. And some of the classic playbook is they're trying to ransomware your data, basically encrypt it, and then, ask for tons of Bitcoin. I've seen it, $500,000 seems to be the going rate these days. And cybersecurity insurance is really there as a worst case scenario, respond, recover, right?
Yeah.
When we think of, identify, protect, detect, respond, and then recover is that last piece. So you need to be able to check boxes on your cybersecurity insurance questionnaire stating that you meet compliance according to their policy, and they'll fight tooth and nail when you go to submit a claim to prove whether or not the boxes you check were true, because the insurance companies aren't in the business to pay out policies, right?
Interesting.
Another one that we're seeing out there is, yeah, there might be fines, especially if you're in a certain, regulated industry that has a compliance framework you have to follow. But there's always the lawyers out there. They're coming after you too. There's class action lawsuits. There's reputation damage, right? There's loss of data that could be detrimental to the company, and so there's a lot of things to consider risk-wise. If you are leaning more towards convenience because you're just trying to run a business and have uptime and meet your financial needs, you're taking on more risk than you realize.
It's interesting. You probably remember this term 10, 15 years ago started the term of a trusted advisor, where like the vendor or the service provider becomes the trusted advisor. And that led into kind of what we call sell another day. First, let's solve the problem. Let's be the trusted advisor. And then we'll build the trust, loyalty, and so on. And then the customer will start paying, and because he likes the service or the level of service. In the past few months, maybe a year or so, I started hearing the combination of words accountability partner. So instead of a trusted advisor, an accountability advisor, or advisor that is also accountable. In your world, Brian, in the MSP world, you guys provide services and you're accountable or supposed to be accountable, right? How does compliance help you? What I mean by that is, imagine a customer that's being hacked and you manage their network and you manage their security, they're being hacked. I'm guessing that you're accountable. How do you leverage compliance in order to kind of protect yourselves? At the end of the day, you need to protect yourself as well. So tell me about that.
I love that you brought that up, because there is an ensued liability, when it comes to handling IT, whether it be a fully managed, relationship with, say, a smaller business where they don't even have internal IT, or even co-managed where, we're working closely with internal IT. We need a way to communicate gaps in compliance, with executives, with management. We need, ultimately, the executive team, the management team, they own those gaps, right? I also like to call it tech debt, things that they haven't invested in properly to secure or maintain compliance is tech debt that's going to come knocking on their door one day. And so these frameworks that are out there are a great way to kind of maybe get out of the weeds, right? Where we can communicate better with our clients, with the exec team, and help them understand from an operational perspective, these are things we need to shore up, right? Do they care about what type of EDR product we have in place and how many threats we're catching, or false positives we're avoiding wasting time on? Not really, right? That's all in the weed stuff. I think it really ties back to a compliance framework that they can relate more to business outcomes and mitigating risk with business outcomes they're trying to reach as an organization.
Interesting. I think we have a question. And by the way, for all of you who are watching and listening, go ahead, bombard us with questions. If you're interested, we're more than happy to answer. So we have a question here from Luciano de Matos. Will the Vicarious Compliance module have automation to fix what is currently on the list? Absolutely. Great question. The answer is a simple one. Yes, yes, and more yes. Definitely expect this coming. Not only automations, but actually what we call a response policy. So for example, if like we said, a continuous scan that will always happen, discovers that a certain benchmark does not adhere to what you want it to adhere to, you can choose to fix it automatically. So you don't have to do it a manual way, fix it automatically based on the response policy. So great question, Luciano. Thank you. Anyone else have questions? Shoot. One of the things that yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Can I speak to the compliance module you guys are working on? I think it goes well with the question you just asked me, right? Is how do we, if I show a standard report from vulnerability management software, and by the way, most of the platforms out there are just scanners. They tell you what the vulnerabilities are, and then you have to go into another system to then patch it, and it's just this clunky process. But the reports we see as IT when it comes to mitigating risks around all the applications, what CVEs are there, what risk are those, we patched all that. A lot of that is just noise to the exec team or the management team. But if you can actually tie, how you're handling vulnerability management according to a compliance framework that's been agreed to from a policy perspective, that then allows that communication to happen properly and help the exec team understand, okay, we are meeting this compliance because they're getting in the weeds dealing with all the security that I don't want to know about, but I know it's happening according to this policy and this framework. And by the way, Vicarious, other platforms out there that are starting to focus more on compliance, mapping to that, more real time, so it doesn't have to be done manually, helps with that communication process.
Absolutely. Let me add to that and also state that we just released our maturity model that any one of you can, by the way, download and see, take a test. Again, ask yourself those questions like in an internal survey and see where you are on the maturity level. That's one thing. And the other thing is that maturity level is actually mapped into common compliance frameworks so that you can actually test yourself where you are in based on NIST, based on other compliance frameworks and so on. So that's something that you can actually use, and it's an actual tangible tool that not only work with, let's say, a chosen benchmark, but how do you compare it to an external one and so on. So that's a very good point. Thank you, Brian.
I've got another point. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The opening trailer we saw, right? It's like the vCISO goes missing when there's an event. I wonder how we can assign more ownership to the people actually making the decisions for the organization. And compliance is a way to do that. I mean, even board members, they don't realize this, but they have liability. They're making decisions that drive how the organization spends money. The CEO making decisions on how the organization spends its money. And so if we've got a way to communicate said security gaps as our job in IT or in security to the exec team, that essentially helps transfer ownership of that risk to that team so that there's a shared responsibility, right? And I think that's what we're lacking too in this industry, is really that understanding that, hey, the security is a shared responsibility. It's not something IT handles, and when there's an issue, it's IT's fault. We, board members, exec teams, they need to be involved and they need to understand what type of security risks might be apparent in that organization, and the compliance framework is the perfect way to do that.
I can share your point here in saying that you probably, both of you know this, that for the past 15 years or so, the cybersecurity, let's say, market, people working there were fighting very, very hard to get the CISO a seat on the board, or not the board, but like in the decision-making process, part of like the C-level decision-making process. And I have to say that in the past 3 or 4 years, we're starting to see more CISOs are sitting at the decision-making table. They have a seat at the table, which is very, very interesting, because then they can give them the right kind of view on the ramifications of the decision. If you do this, this might happen. If you do this, this might happen. Let's weigh the pros and cons and make a decision together. So very good point, Brian. Yeah. Moving on, what I'm starting to see, with and it takes the naming methodology of application security, is compliance as code. As you know, there are companies or vendors, when they will create like CNAPs, for example, they were focused on the right side of the deployment, like runtime deployment, tell you what's happening actually after it actually happened, alerting you on it from a compliance perspective, from a security perspective, from resource perspective, and so on. And they started moving left along the CI/CD or the development, let's call it the software development cycle, move left into where the code is being developed, let's say infrastructure as code, for example. So there is a movement now to try and check for relevant compliance benchmarks during the development cycle of the specific application code or the infrastructure's code and so on. And you see application security vendors moving right to get more insights into runtime, into the deployment and runtime stages. So it's very interesting. I'd like to pick both of your brains on this and tell me kind of, what do you think about this? Compliance moving left. Even before something is released, it's being tested for relevant compliance frameworks. It's interesting.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I wonder why that is taking so long to start doing. But then I think of, well, we're trying to rush a product to market, and we need to make money before we can spend more money. And unfortunately, moving left costs more money, right? You're spending money that's not necessarily adding features to the platform. It's making it more secure. But in my mind, that's proper due diligence. If we look at even the new zero trust principle that's been around for a while, but people are finally starting to adopt it, that is really moving a lot of those items that you might find on a compliance framework more on the left side, right? You're going with more of a default deny approach where this is the behavior that we understand that should only be allowed, and therefore we're not going to allow any other behavior. And same thing goes with software development, right? This is the behavior that the software should be performing, and it shouldn't be doing anything else or be allowed to do anything else. And so how do we shore that up to make sure it can't be exploited at that point, right? Let's not wait until it's to market and there's a CVE that's out that we got to deal with now, right? We could have dealt with that during the development stage, ultimately, if we would have had the proper checks and balances in place.
Interesting. Ryan, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think it comes back to, it's very much a shared responsibility. Anyone who is online and partakes in this, from the initial development down to the end user, which is pretty much everybody these days falls into some part of that. I agree with Brian. I think in the past, and it'll be interesting to see with AI and all of these vibe coded applications that are, I'm sure, going to be coming pretty soon and already are. How they fall into it. I assume not very well. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a cost associated with that. Kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Do you want to adopt those principles and comply and use secure practices earlier on, or do you want to kick the can up the street and get hit with a ransomware attack or any of the other negative outcomes that we heard? So yeah, and I also think it's very probably frustrating to a security practitioner who has done everything right, but because of some application they're using, which has isn't using secure development principles, is introducing risk, and third-party risk is a very large thing. There was just recently an open letter that someone from Chase had, I think the president or something like that, had released that was calling on third-party vendors to step their security game up, because they were introducing a lot of the risks that they have, and for a lot of companies, this is a little bit of a blind spot. So yeah, it's definitely good to see that this is being adopted earlier on and shifting left. And again, curious to see how the AI wave affects that.
Interesting. I want to do a trial run with you guys. I want you to close your eyes and imagine there is no compliance solutions in the world. Okay? I know it's hard. Try it. No compliance. And now open your eyes and you have to invent it. What would it look like for you guys?
It's a big question.
Yes.
I don't know if we have enough time. I don't know, Brian, any thoughts on your side?
I go back to the data when I think about a security framework.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of our big challenges that we face right now, and I kind of blame this on Apple for coming out with those commercials and teaching a whole generation that there's an app for that, is the fact that our data is so dispersed, right? It's in all these different software platforms, and you've got the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts are the big guys, but then you got all the smaller guys, and I wonder, wonder, I know that that actually makes it more difficult to comply to a security framework when you have more data spread out across multiple applications, especially if they're not all meeting a certain criteria when it comes to proper secure development, kind of a secure by design approach. That's the big push that CISA is trying to get people to do now is, hey, I do things secure by design instead of waiting until after the fact. So if I could, wave a magic wand, I'm wondering, how do I consolidate my data? How do I not use so many apps? How do I, this big sprawl that's happened so that we can go to market and get things done and feel like a tool's going to solve our problems? So we have way too many tools now. How do we consolidate that back down and kind of go with a less is more approach? And then when I think about AI frameworks, well, what I love about AI, is there's mixed feelings about it out there. I happen to love it. Is it directly correlates with the security framework around understanding, needing to protect data. AI needs access to data. It needs to have the wisdom to know what to do with the data. And without having access to the data or the wisdom to know what to do with the data, AI is kind of dumb. And so, when you talk about vibe coding, that is a concern. Are you coding something with AI, but not asking AI to help you make it secure? Do you not have another AI agent, this new agentic AI approach that's responsible for trying to red team said application and identify vulnerabilities that the initial AI agent didn't bother to think about because its main task was just creating the application? So, I think there'll be approaches to vibe coding that can work, but because it's so easy to do, there's going to be people that maybe haven't properly educated themselves on the importance of compliance, and they're going to be using vibe coded apps or trying to go to market with vibe coded apps, not realizing the risks that they're taking on. And so yeah, that's the magic wand waving, right? We got to figure out how to get there, I guess.
So I'll share with you my vision. My vision is that compliance is a non-issue. And what I mean by that is that it's completely transparent to the developers, to the IT managers, only the compliance officer, if we will ever need one, maybe they won't have a job anymore based on my vision, right? And the vision is this. The underlying engine always is scanning, always does what it needs to do. And as a compliance admin or so on, you have the ability to understand from the relevant platforms that you're working on to set policies that's saying, okay, if this is a very low impact on the business, fix it. Don't even tell me, fix it. If it's a medium, get my approval. If it's a high level, okay, maybe we need some sort of a team to decide when do we do this patching, when do we do this fix, based on something, right? I would guess that 80% of all compliance issues could be automatically resolved. And then the next 24 hours, you get a report. Listen, I've done this special AI, like you talked about. I fixed this, and so on. So if I look at my past, 20 years ago or so, I was the responsible for compliance for ISO 9000 in my company. And I remember that we did this audit every 6 months or every 8 months, I can't remember. And a month before the audit, everybody was scrambling and getting the information and writing. Everything was written down, by the way. Even though we were computers, it was written down. Everything was written down. And I know that I didn't do anything but this because we had to pass. There is no second chance here. You can be not certified, and then everybody knows you didn't pass your ISO 9000 certification. Anyways, I hated that. I dreaded that month before of the audit. And I said there has to be a better way. And the better way is that you're always compliant. It doesn't matter if the auditor comes today, in a month, in 2 weeks, next hour, you click a button, you get the report, you're okay. And I think that's the vision where compliance doesn't become so special in a sense. It's there. It's seamless, it's transparent, and you don't care about it, quote unquote. Because it's always ready, okay? That's the way I see it. So the idea here is, and I think you touched on it, Brian, is that, like you said, compliance is not only technology, or security is not only technology. It's about the people as well. So let me challenge both of you from your experience. How do you create a new, let's say, security/compliance culture that's driven by outcomes, as you said, Brian, instead of obligations? Like, you remember a month before, everybody hates doing this. How do we do that?
I mean, I love your approach to being more transparent. I feel like privacy is something that holds us back, especially when it comes to cybersecurity and compliance. And I do appreciate privacy, right? There are things that need to be kept private, but there's definitely a competition when it comes to cybersecurity, and that causes us to not be able to rise the tides from a defense and an offense perspective. And I wonder how we might be able to get rid of that. And a simple analogy is, if we think of law enforcement, right, that's a type of security. You're not going to have a criminal that has a crime in California and then goes to Nevada and commits crimes. And you're not going to have a situation where the law enforcement in California is not communicating with law enforcement in Nevada to help kind of rise the tides, right?
Those days have passed, yes.
Yeah. So I think transparency is a big part of it. Being willing to share information that companies might be holding as intellectual property, trying to make it sound like they're the better security company. That's one aspect of it that I see is kind of, there needs to be more transparency there where we're helping each other out better. No one's got the silver bullet. No one's got the secret sauce, right?
So you see an organizational shift here? Because remember, if you have two teams this is responsible for compliance, this one is responsible for security, there are going to be, this is his job, this is my job, there are going to be, but maybe an organizational shift where, you combine those two together and saying, this is now our job with a common goal. Because remember, the goal of the compliance is one thing and the goal of security is another, right?
Yep.
So how do we converge those two goals together?
It really needs more executive team buy-in and shared responsibility, because I see that even, with these bigger organizations we work with. You're right. Their IT teams are siloed, right? You've got, even more than just security and compliance. You've got the sysadmins siloed from the SecOps, siloed from the InfoSec team, right? And that they all have their jobs and they're staying in their lane, but they all directly affect each other, right? Like a threat actor isn't going to come into an organization and be like, oh, I'm only dealing with InfoSec, and it's, they're dealing with all the different layers involved. So you're right. I think, it kind of goes back to the shared responsibility, understanding that, maybe helping these teams and helping clients understand how, while they may feel like they're a small part of an overall big picture, helping them understand how they're helping, tie things up. And I think a compliance framework is perfect for that, right? It's kind of, you look at a compliance framework, here's everything InfoSec, SecOps, sysadmins, they're all kind of responsible for, right? And that puts everyone on the same page, understanding how they ultimately help this organization reach a business outcome of success around compliance.
Interesting. Ryan, what do you think? What is your take on this?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the last point about, what would the ideal, compliance framework look like if none existed and we were building a new one. I think those are a couple of the biggest challenges. One is building that culture. It's always kind of funny to me when I see this culture around, again, being hesitant to deploy changes to something that's in my mind should be a pretty simple fix. Deploying a patch to a PDF reader, for example, or something similar. I think it's funny because patching, which is just one small part of compliance frameworks in a lot of cases, it should be something very simple. It's something everyone is familiar with. It's not a new concept, but again, it still has this difficulty to get buy-in, and the fear of causing disruptions and who's going to own, getting us back to a productive state if it does cause issues, is still something I see, day in and day out, which is again quite surprising. So I think if I were building a new framework, I would say, and how we get there is a different story, but getting some more training, more formalized training and ownership from the end users, from all of the different folks that take part in this. And Brian, you brought up a great point the other day, which was that maybe they don't feel this sense of ownership in regards to this compliance framework, because it's this giant questionnaire and their eyes kind of glaze over if they hear about it or see it, or whatever. There's a degree of separation there. But everyone is online today, their data is out there, so they can understand these things have consequences, not only to the business but to them in their personal lives. So I think formalizing some training around that, and also the other part, again going back to the last question, was asset management. Coming from an incident response background, I was always frustrated by we would do forensic collection, we would do recovery, all of this work, weeks of 12, 14, 16-hour days, and they'd say, oh yeah, maybe we have this Windows XP machine in a closet somewhere, we're not really sure. That's a pretty simple example of where they're not sure of their inventory. And again, as Brian pointed out, with AI, data is also an asset. And where is your data, and what has access to it? That's something that we're going to see more and more of. So I think those two things, more formalization, more requirements around inventory management continuously, and also end user training and getting them, more on board with some of these concepts.
Amazing. We actually have two questions coming in from our LinkedIn stream. The first one is, are we as Vicarious mapping to CIS level 1, 2, and 3? The answer, of course, is yes. And could the Vicarious Compliance module be expanded into cloud posture management for Azure, AWS, GCP against the CIS benchmarks for misconfiguration, alignment, drift, etc.? The answer also is yes. That's actually a roadmap item that we have to support cloud type of assets. Mm-hmm. So yes, this is something that is coming. It's not coming next month, but it is coming. So that definitely, I think, answers that question. Thank you, Keith, for asking. Anyone else has an interesting question from anywhere in the world where they're seeing us streaming? Be more than happy to answer those questions. And for us, kind of maybe one question before the end is, where do you see kind of the compliance innovation, like in terms of technology, people, processes, or maybe like a mindset shift, that you think will define the next 3 years? Brian, you go first.
Well, we still need to do a better job shoring up human identities. And I do want to touch again on what Ryan brought up about, how do we make this feel more personal down to the end user? I mean, we're security teams, IT, we take it very personal already, right? It's like we see something, we want to fix it. We don't always have the power to fix it. When I work with small business clients, sometimes that takes an investment. Can we get them to understand what that investment's going to help with? Are they willing to make it? When I work with our larger clients, typically we're helping bridge the gap between the exec team and IT, acting as kind of a mediator, pointing out, hey, you should really listen to the IT team. They're bringing up some important parts here. Let me help explain that to you and how that really ties to a business outcome you're looking to achieve, right? And connect those dots. Well, but if we go down to the end user, they're showing up to work, they're getting a paycheck. They don't have as much ownership in the organization as the IT team, the security team, the exec team. They fill a very small part of the organization. But if we can get them to understand that, security is even important in their personal life, the reason they're getting the security training isn't just to protect the company's data. It's also to help them understand, what about their own data? When I think about important data to every human, it's our pictures, our videos, our sensitive documents, maybe our health records, our bank accounts, financial items, and if we think about, well, what if that I had a personal event where I lost that information, or it was held ransom, or it got out to the public and I didn't want it to get out to the public, or, just got deleted and it could never get to it again. I think that ties a little more emotionally to the understanding of, if we can get them to be more secure and understand compliance better in their personal lives, they'll much more likely to be willing to take ownership within an organization for it as well.
Nice. Ryan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I also think AI is probably the obvious one as well. Not to keep bringing that up again, but yeah, I think that is.
The joke, Ryan, that someone goes to the market in the next 10 years and says, "Give me 2 pounds of AI." So
I'll talk about AI all day. I'm glad Ryan brought it up.
Yeah. No, I think it's the obvious one because it's such there's almost a degree of it being like the Wild West. It's this new thing that's evolving at hyper speed. Every day there's a new model that's state of the art and better than all of the others that we've been using, and there's a new tool that's using it, and again data, where is it, and who has access to it, and what is it being trained on. So I think that's something, and one of the questions we had earlier too that I don't think we dived too deeply on is with something like AI, regulations are kind of notoriously can be a little bit slow to adapt to new technologies and new attacks, and IOCs and things like that. Generally they're a bit lagging. So I think that's going to be one to definitely keep an eye on. I'm sure everyone already is, if not being fatigued by it already. But yeah, how are you using AI in your tools, in your stack? That I think is going to be one of the biggest areas that we'll see in the next couple of years.
Interesting. Well, my take on compliance is, hold your seat for a second, because I think you'll be surprised. Gamification. If we want organizations to adopt something, we need to make it fun, we need to make it interesting, and we need to make it as a mini competition. What I mean by that is, imagine vendors will now tell you, for example, for this framework, you have, 86%, that's your score, 86. But let's say you're in the financial sector, right? The average in the financial sector is 92. Okay, so I'm behind. But then the system will tell, listen, if you fix these 3 things with minimal impact, major impact, whatever, 3 things, 4 things, you can align yourself to the industry standard, to the vertical standard, right? I think that will have people on the compliance system fixing it every day and adopting more automations, because they don't want to fix it every day. They want to say low impact patching, low impact fixes, low impact whatever, do it yourself and report back to me. That goes into the AI thing. Report back to me every 24 hours telling me how my posture improved, my compliance posture improved, and how do I compare, right? So, if you can go deeper into that, for example, in your city, in your state, in your country, you are behind, you're ahead, you're ahead. Remember, some games, I think on Facebook at the time, said you are better than 12% of all people. You're better than 90% of all people. That makes you play that game again and again to improve yourself. That's exactly, I think, the place where gamification and compliance can converge and be that kind of leading light into a better posture.
Yeah, it's a good point, and actually we get asked about that today. Is seeing how one particular customer compares to others in their same sector. So yeah, I think this is something that certainly there's an appetite for, and if you do have that top 90%, it's something that I think organizations can kind of take a sense of pride in and want to keep that position and not fall down and keep improving. So yeah, that's a really good point.
And this is exactly like the thing that you can take to the board and say, listen, in our industry, the average is 86, we're 90. Immediately, you don't have any more questions. That's it. It means that you're doing your job, that kind of thing. I know how scary it is sometimes going to the board with tough answers, and how do you put a good spin on it? This solves the problem. What do you think, Brian?
I love the idea. I mean, gamification, we've got a video game. There's a lot of younger and even older generation that love winning a game, right? And so the minute you gamify it, I think what we should also have part of that is what's the award system, right? Is there some sort of award system that can even tie to a business outcome at that point? Right.
First, not getting fired. I think that's a good.
I was thinking.
Well,
I was thinking going back to the cyber insurance thing. If you can take that to your insurance carrier and say, look, I'm well above the average. Maybe your premium is reduced, or maybe you're more insurable. So.
Well, and we're seeing it in the government space, right? With CMMC, like you will not get awarded a contract unless you meet certain criteria. I was daydreaming about, wow, what if IT gave exec teams awards, right? Hey, thank you for trusting us and investing in us. Here's an award that you get now because we meet this new compliance framework, right? Versus a certification, it's more of an award that we get, that we want to hang on the wall. It's that we're proud of,
Amazing. Any final words, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I think this has been a great conversation. So yeah, really happy to be a part of it. And thanks again, Brian, for joining us. Yeah, I think, and also thanks to those who asked questions and again, joined us here. I think it's an exciting time to, be, using our tool with all the changes we have coming out. We talked about a few of those with some of the questions that were asked. So again, thank you for those. And yeah, keep an eye out for our compliance modules to continue to grow as well as the rest of the product. And if you're not using, our tool, make sure you're complying one way or the other. And, building that security culture, start having those talks, can be difficult, but, best to start planting that tree today and let it grow than wait any longer. So yeah, thank you again.
And Ryan, you were too shy to say, those of you who are not using our platform, you're more than welcome to ask and see it in action. Ryan and team will be more than happy to show you. And that was the only plug for the show.
Yes.
Brian, your final words.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying I use Vicarious VRX as well.
Guilty as charged.
I highly recommend it. I mean, and why do we use it? I mean, when I guess some good parting words is, compliance isn't something you're going to achieve overnight. You got to start somewhere. Don't be intimidated by the large mountain that you have to climb, if there is a large mountain right ahead of you, and put together, a plan. When I think about a proper plan for compliance, it does involve people, process, and technology. It is nice to be able to lean more on process and technology and not have your compliance be heavily reliant just on people, because we are humans. There is human error. So as you're wanting to build out compliance and look to improve it, try to understand, what processes are involved. If it relies on a human, how might you be able to automate that process using technology easier, right? And one example with Vicarious VRX we love is it's really taken this vulnerability management that's typically dispersed between multiple platforms where there is a human needing to be involved to identify vulnerabilities in one platform, then go to another platform, patch said vulnerability, then go back to the other platform, verify vulnerability, it said vulnerabilities patched. And so anytime you've got a process that's heavy with human interaction, there is possibility for error to happen. And so how can you use technology to automate processes to make the compliance job easier for the people, right?
Cool. I think that, to summarize, I think that's exactly the point of this session. Compliance is difficult, but it doesn't have to be. Like you said, you have to start somewhere. And when you leverage automations where you take the low-hanging fruit and fix them first, you see how very fast you move up your posture and you improve your posture very, very fast without a lot of, let's say, headaches. And of course, when you add more automations, you actually save on time because you have a sort of, let's say, an extra employee that you don't have to pay for. And they work 24/7 if you do the policy automations and so on. So your reports are ready made and they're certified. You can take it to the attestation or use it for attestation or take it to the auditor and so on. So definitely leveraging AI for machine versus machine type of defense instead of human beings trying to catch up with hackers using AI. Definitely automation. And the more frameworks you adhere to, the better your posture is. And if you could compare it by gamification to other sectors or other companies within your sector, that can actually bring you up as well in your compliance posture. So without further ado, Brian, thank you very, very much for joining us today. Your inputs were, amazing. I learned a lot. Thank you. Ryan, I know you're the best, so I don't have to give you any more good words. You already have them. So thank you for you as well for your time. And I was Sadiq Ratu and enjoyed your session with me here.
Before we go, I just want to, you said it was the only plug, but I want to give Brian a plug here as well. Brian, you've got a new podcast coming out. Did you want to maybe tell us where we can find that?
Yeah, I'm just about to make the trailer. The podcast will be called The Tech Stoic. And Stoicism is one of our core values here at ITECH. It's focusing on what you can control. Don't let the things you can't control distract you from the things you can control. It's kind of the founding value there. And starting in June, we're going to have discussions around a Stoic approach to technology. How can we do more with less? How can we prepare for AI? We didn't get to this, but it's important to understand there's an 80-to-1 ratio right now between non-human identities and human identities. So for every one human identity, there's 80 non-humans, which AI uses, by the way. So what does that landscape look like to protect? So just going to share everything we've learned, what we failed at and wish we didn't fail at to help prevent other people from failing at things, just be very transparent. Back to the earlier point, how can we be more transparent when it comes to compliance and security? Hope to have some great guests on too. Looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Amazing. Good luck with that.
And it'll be on all the platforms. Follow me on LinkedIn. Ultimately, is probably the best way to keep up with things.
Cool.
Perfect.
Well, then thank you everyone again. And for those who joined us, thank you very much for your time and your questions. And hope to see you in our next session. Bye everyone for now.
Thanks everybody.